Part 1. The Unexpected Arrival. The first day Gia Park stepped into Riverdale High was like watching magic unfold. She wasn't just another transfer student, she was something different. Her dark hair fell perfectly around her shoulders and her eyes seemed to hold secrets that nobody could quite understand. When she walked down the hallway, something strange happened. Students who were normally busy with their own conversations would suddenly stop and stare. Teachers would smile unusually wide, and even the school janitor would straighten his uniform whenever she passed. Hyun Kim watched all of this with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Unlike everyone else, he didn't feel the overwhelming pull that seemed to draw people towards Gia. While his classmates would giggle and compete for her attention, Hyun remained calm and observant. He noticed how people's behaviors subtly changed. Friends would suddenly agree with everything she said. Teachers would modify their lesson plans to make her more comfortable, and even the most stubborn students became incredibly cooperative. During lunch, Gia sat alone, but not by choice. Students wanted to sit near her, but they seemed almost afraid to approach. Her presence was magnetic, yet intimidating. Hyun, sitting 2 tables away, kept stealing glances. Something about her didn't feel normal. The way she moved, the way she looked around the cafeteria, it was calculated, almost like she was studying everyone. His best friend Seo, who usually talked non-stop, was unusually quiet whenever Gia was nearby. "Don't you find her weird, Hyun?" whispered to Seo, but Seo just smiled and said, "She's perfect, absolutely perfect." The robotic-like response sent a chill down Hyun's spine. What made Gia different wasn't just her appearance or her ability to command attention. It was something deeper, something almost supernatural. When she spoke, her voice had a rhythm that seemed to flow directly into people's minds. Students would nod before she even completed her sentences. Teachers would praise her without her even answering questions. Hyun knew something was off, but he couldn't explain what. He wasn't scared. He was intrigued. While others saw a beautiful, charming transfer student, he saw a puzzle waiting to be solved. Her movements were too precise, her interactions too controlled. She didn't behave like a typical teenager. The first week progressed. The town of Riverdale itself seemed to change. Local shops would mysteriously have exactly what Gia wanted. Neighbors who never spoke would suddenly organize welcome parties. The entire community felt like it was slowly being rewired, and only Hyun seemed to notice. During a school assembly, Hyun watched Gia carefully. When she stood on the stage to introduce herself, the entire auditorium fell silent. Her introduction was brief, but every word seemed carefully chosen. She talked about moving from a small town, her interests in science and global cultures, but something in her tone suggested she was holding back massive amounts of information. The principal, usually a strict and serious man, looked at Gia with an almost childlike admiration. "We're so fortunate to have you," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. Hyun found this reaction completely bizarre. That evening, walking home, Hyun couldn't shake off the feeling that Gia was more than just a student. She was an enigma, a walking mystery that had descended upon their quiet town. And while everyone else was falling under her spell, he was determined to understand what was really happening. Little did Hyun know, his journey of discovery was just beginning, and Gia Park was about to change everything he thought he knew about. Normal, would you like me to continue with the next part in the same engaging, human-centric style? Part 2. Strange Connections. The transformation of Riverdale happened so subtly that most residents didn't even realize it was happening. Hyun watched in growing disbelief as the entire town seemed to reorganize itself around Gia's subtle suggestions. It started with small things. Mr. Lee, the local grocery store owner, who was known for being particularly grumpy, suddenly became incredibly accommodating. When Gia mentioned enjoying a specific type of imported tea during a casual conversation at school, within days, his store had a special display dedicated to that exact brand. Customers who never cared about international teas now couldn't stop talking about its unique flavor. Hyun's own parents were perhaps the most startling example. His father, a pragmatic accountant who rarely changed his routine, began suggesting family dinners that coincidentally aligned with times Gia might be free. His mother started preparing dishes that Jia had casually mentioned liking during previous conversations. When Hyun pointed out these strange coincidences, they would smile and say, "Isn't Jia just wonderful?" The local city council meetings became another bizarre spectacle. Projects that had been stuck for years suddenly got approved with unprecedented speed. When Jia offhandedly mentioned during a school project presentation that the town could benefit from a new community center, city officials began drawing up plans within weeks. No one questioned the sudden urgency or the source of inspiration. Hyun started a secret notebook documenting each strange occurrence. He created a timeline of events, connecting the dots between Jia's arrival and the town's gradual transformation. School counselors who were typically reserved now went out of their way to support her. Traffic police would smile and wave when she passed, even if she was technically breaking minor traffic rules. During a weekend community fair, Hyun observed Jia's interactions more closely. She didn't seem to be actively manipulating people. Her influence was more subtle, a gentle suggestion here, a soft-spoken recommendation there. People would look at her, their eyes glazing over momentarily, and then proceed to do exactly what she seemed to want. His best friend Seo, once a rebellious teenager who questioned everything, now spoke about Jia with a reverence typically reserved for religious figures. "She understands everything," Seo would say, his voice losing its usual energy. "She knows what's best for everyone." The local teenagers changed too. Groups that would typically never interact now merged seamlessly. Cliques dissolved, replaced by a strange, unified admiration for Jia. School competitions became less about winning and more about collective achievement. Sports teams that were historically rivals now practiced together, sharing strategies and supporting each other unconditionally. Hyun's research extended beyond personal observations. He started collecting newspaper clippings, social media posts, and any documentation that might reveal a pattern. Local news stories suddenly focused more on community harmony and less on typical small-town conflicts. Crime rates dropped mysteriously. Neighborhood disputes seemed to resolve themselves. One evening, while trying to understand what was happening, Hyun overheard a conversation between two city officials at a local cafe. They spoke about Jia with a mixture of admiration and something else, almost like programmed respect. "She has a vision," one said. "We must support her vision." The most unsettling part was how natural everything seemed. If someone had told Hyun a month ago that an entire town could be subtly influenced by a high school student, he would have laughed. Now he was living it. As weeks passed, Hyun realized he was the only one who saw the peculiarity of the situation. Everyone else was comfortably numb, happily moving in a synchronized dance choreographed by an invisible conductor named Jia Park. Something was definitely not right, and Hyun was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Would you like me to proceed with the next part in the same engaging narrative style? Part 3. The Confrontation. The school assembly hall buzzed with an unusual energy. Rows of students sat in perfect, almost mechanical alignment, their eyes occasionally darting towards Jia, who sat near the front with an impossibly calm demeanor. Hyun had spent weeks preparing for this moment, carefully collecting evidence and crafting questions that would expose the truth. When the principal finished his mundane announcements, Hyun raised his hand. The room fell silent, not the typical teenage murmur, but an eerie, complete stillness. "I have a question," he said, his voice steady despite the hundreds of eyes now fixed on him. Jia turned, her movements smooth and calculated. For the first time, Hyun noticed something unusual in her eyes, a flicker of something that wasn't human. Calculation, concern, fear. "Ms. Park," Hyun began, "your school records show you've attended 5 different schools in the past 2 years. Each time you've been a top student, but never stayed long enough to complete a full academic year. Can you explain that?" The room temperature seemed to drop. Nearby, 2 men in dark suits, who Hyun had noticed watching the assembly, shifted uncomfortably. Jia's perfect smile wavered for just a millisecond. "I come from a family that travels frequently," she responded, her voice melodic and precise. Too precise. My parents work in international diplomacy, Hyun pressed further, but your passport stamps don't match diplomatic travel patterns. In fact, some of the countries you've supposedly visited don't even have entry records for someone with your name. A pin drop would have sounded like a thunderclap in that moment. Students around them remained unnaturally still, their breathing synchronized. SEO sitting nearby looked like a perfectly posed mannequin. Gia's composure began to crack. Tiny beads of sweat formed on her forehead, something completely out of character for someone who had always appeared flawlessly composed. The men in dark suits took a half step forward. "You're asking too many questions," Gia said, her voice losing its previous musical quality. It was more mechanical now, like a recording slightly out of sync. Hyun pulled out a folder. Printed documents, research notes, travel records, a mosaic of inconsistencies he had meticulously gathered. "These don't add up," he said. "Who are you, really?" For a brief moment, something extraordinary happened. Gia's perfect human facade flickered like a faulty hologram. Her eyes, just for a split second, seemed to shift color, reflecting something that wasn't entirely human. The nearby government officials tensed, hands subtly moving towards hidden communication devices. The entire assembly hall felt like a pressure cooker. Students remained absolutely still, their collective breath suspended. Even the air seemed to be waiting for something to break. "Some questions are better left unanswered," Gia finally responded, her voice returning to its previous melodic tone. But now Hyun could hear something underneath, a hint of a warning, a subtle threat. The two men in dark suits were now standing, their presence both threatening and protective. One spoke into a small earpiece, his eyes never leaving Hyun, and Gia, what had started as a simple school assembly, had transformed into something else entirely. A confrontation, a revelation. The first crack in a perfectly constructed facade. Hyun knew he had touched something significant. He had challenged something far beyond a typical high school mystery. And whatever Gia was, whatever mission she represented, he had just made it personal. The game had changed. And nobody in the room, except Hyun, seemed to realize it. "Would you like me to continue with the next part of the story in the same engaging narrative style?" Part 4. Unveiling Secrets. The night was quiet, but Hyun's mind was anything but peaceful. After weeks of careful digging, he had finally found something that would change everything. Hidden in the back of his father's old filing cabinet, a place he knew his parents would never suspect him of searching, lay a set of documents that looked nothing like typical government paperwork. The papers were thin, almost translucent, with markings that seemed to shift when he looked at them directly. Hyun's hands trembled as he spread them across his bedroom desk, careful not to wake his parents sleeping in the next room. Each document contained fragments of information about Gia. Not her school records or typical background information, but something far more complex. Detailed psychological profiles, behavioral analysis charts, and what appeared to be scientific observations about human social interactions. The documents weren't just about Gia, they were about an entire systematic study of human behavior. One particular page caught his attention. A detailed breakdown of psychological manipulation techniques that went far beyond typical social influence. Mathematical algorithms mapped human emotional responses, showing how subtle changes in communication could fundamentally alter group behavior. And at the center of these documents was Gia's name, marked with a classification that made Hyun's blood run cold. Advanced Observation Unit, Primary Investigator. The implications were staggering. Gia wasn't just a student. She was part of something much larger, a sophisticated research project studying human social dynamics at a level far beyond normal scientific research. Hyun realized the danger of his discovery almost immediately. The town's behavior, the synchronized responses, the way people seemed to move in perfect harmony around Gia, it was all part of a carefully constructed experiment. But someone was watching him. The next morning, strange things began happening. His school locker was mysteriously searched. His computer files seemed subtly altered. Even his online research history showed signs of interference. His best friend Sio, who had always been supportive, suddenly became distant. "Maybe you should stop asking so many questions," Sio warned during lunch, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "Some things are better left unknown." Local authorities began taking notice. Small rumors started circulating about Hyun. Nothing direct, but subtle whispers. Unstable, some would say. Attention-seeking, others would suggest. His reputation was being systematically dismantled. The government officials who had watched the school assembly now seemed to be everywhere, at the local coffee shop, outside his home. Their presence was a constant reminder that he was getting too close to something significant. One evening, an unmarked envelope appeared in his mailbox. Inside were photographs, images of other towns, other schools, other students who seemed to have gone through similar experiences. Each photo showed perfect synchronized communities with a central figure much like Jia. Hyun understood now that this was bigger than just Riverdale. This was a massive, potentially global investigation into human behavioral patterns. Jia was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, but knowledge is a dangerous thing, and Hyun was quickly learning that some secrets are meant to remain hidden. The more he uncovered, the more dangerous his position became. Each document, each piece of evidence, brought him closer to a truth that could potentially change everything he understood about human interaction. What started as a simple curiosity about a new student had transformed into an investigation that could potentially expose something extraordinary, and Hyun knew he was running out of time. Someone would want to stop him, and they would use every method possible to ensure his silence. Would you like me to continue with the final part of the story in the same engaging narrative style? Part 5. Unexpected Departure. The final confrontation wasn't going to be a dramatic battle or a Hollywood-style showdown. It was going to be a battle of intelligence, preparation, and a single moment of technological intervention. Hyun had spent weeks creating a custom device, something between a signal jammer and a sophisticated frequency disruptor. Hidden in a modified smartphone case, it was his last hope to break the mysterious control Jia seemed to have over the entire town. The opportunity came during the annual town festival. Jia would be giving a speech, an event that had become something of a community ritual. Everyone would be gathered, their attention completely focused on her. It was the perfect moment to test his theory. As Jia stood on the central stage, her voice smooth and captivating, Hyun activated the device. Initially, nothing seemed to happen, but then subtle changes began occurring. The synchronized nodding stopped. People's glazed expressions started to clear. For the first time, Jia looked vulnerable. Her perfect composure cracked, revealing something underneath, a hint of concern, of potential exposure. "What have you done?" she whispered, her voice losing its previous musical quality. The town seemed to wake up from a collective dream. People began blinking, looking around, confused. It was like watching a massive hypnotic spell suddenly break. Nearby government officials, who had always watched silently, now looked genuinely panicked. One spoke rapidly into a communication device, his voice urgent and controlled. Jia's response was immediate. She wasn't scared, she was calculating. In a matter of moments, her entire demeanor changed. The perfectly crafted high school student persona dissolved, revealing something far more complex. "My mission is beyond your understanding," she said, her voice now carrying a strange accent that didn't belong to any known language. Observation, understanding, preparation. Hyun realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. Jia wasn't just studying human behavior. She was preparing for something much larger, a potential diplomatic groundwork for something that extended far beyond their small town. Within hours, Jia disappeared. No dramatic escape, no confrontation. Just a simple, methodical departure that left everyone confused. School records were wiped clean. The government officials vanished. It was like she had never existed. Only Hyun remembered. Only he knew the truth about the extraordinary visitor who had transformed their entire community. In the weeks that followed, Riverdale slowly returned to normal. People couldn't quite explain the strange period they had experienced. Memories became fuzzy, interactions became less synchronized. But something had fundamentally changed. Hyun's research documents became his personal secret. He knew that sharing them would sound crazy. Who would believe that a single high school student could manipulate an entire town? The town gradually forgot. But Hyun knew something significant had happened. A test had been conducted, an observation completed, and whatever Jia represented was just the beginning. One final document remained, a cryptic message that Hyun found hidden in the device he had created. It read simply, Phase 1 complete, preparing for next engagement. The mystery of Jia Park was over. But something told Hyun that this was just the start of something much bigger. As the town returned to its normal rhythm, only one person understood the extraordinary events that had transpired, and he knew that someday, somewhere, another observation would begin. The game was far from over. Would you like me to make any modifications or adjustments to the story?